Welcome, guys. Welcome. Today's guest is Reverend Leslie Peters. She's an RN. So I'm going to introduce her and read a little bit from her bio. She's an inspirational keynote speaker, a spiritual teacher and guide, inspirational speaker, and podcast guest. She's an intentional listener, a transformational conversationalist, a consultant, and trauma-informed communication and self-literacy. So welcome, without any further ado, let's welcome Miss Peters.
Hey, how are you doing? Good afternoon. I'm so sorry. That is a mouthful, all that. And Dinar and I were saying in the beginning, like when I left work as a nurse, people are like, what do you do? And I'm like, wow, I know what I do, but it's not easy to say in a short. So that's all those labels. I'm just basically what I do, I give people an experience of seeing themselves, but my goal is also to change systems. So that's where the mouthful trauma-informed self-communication, self-literacy came out.
and that's the reason why I asked you to come on the show, because you're so easy to connect with. You have a great background, very inspirational, and you're from Philadelphia.
Yes.
So there goes the connection right there. So I was like, I have to have this lady on my show. I have to have her on my show.
Yeah.
So can you tell the audience a little bit about yourself? Let them get a little gist about you, and then we'll go into your background.
Yeah. So, it's funny. This is when I asked about myself, there was so much about myself I didn't know up until 5 years ago. Like I lived my life a certain way, but I never knew like why I lived my life that way, because it was different than most. And so, about 4 or 5 years ago, I went deep spiritually and started writing to my younger self. And that's when I uncovered all this stuff and all the pieces of my puzzle came together. And so that puzzle, I guess my story is like a lot of people. I had trauma growing up and started when I was around 2, sexual abuse from a family member, a parent. And it lasted till I was about 12. And then I don't remember the incidences. And when I was writing to my younger self, I really didn't care to see the experiences. I just wanted to know what I felt like, because I wanted to deal with the feelings, the experiences, But when I was 12, I said no, and I stopped it. And then like the verbal abuse and emotional neglect and emotional abuse started. So, my parents, my dad was a gambler, so he had an addiction. And my mom was a typical enabler. And like a lot of women, I married someone just like my father, he was same person. And ironically, my son, I gave birth to an alcoholic, my son was drinking. So I've had a lifetime of being around people who were hurting really bad, who I knew loved me, but it wasn't, a desired way of being loved, and it was, I know gaslighting and thinking you're crazy, and, because like, from my experience, people with addictions, like when they're mean and nasty, that's not the true person. That's the disease talking. And so what that leads to, though, is that sometimes they're nice and sometimes they're horrible. And so a child stuck in the middle going, maybe I am crazy. Like what? Because this doesn't make sense, But that's just like the quick facts of the story. Like a lot of us also, when I was a child, I disassociated, what happens, I think, when we're kids is that like when something happens that we can't make sense of, we kind of separate mind and body. So we don't know what's going on in our body and we don't remember those experiences, which actually I think is a godsend. I've talked to psychiatrists too. I'm like, what do you think? I think like that dissociation in childhood is like, the brain's way of protecting us. But so the way I live my life that I never understood, I was always kind of different, really philosophical. Like ninth grade, I'd want to have these great conversations about life, and people just didn't get that, you know? And so then junior year, maybe I started to, and I always felt connected to myself, but I didn't feel a connection with my family. You know, there was no anger, there was no hatred. I just didn't feel like part of the family, if that makes sense.
Yes,
And
it does. It does.
yeah. And so in high school, I tried to, I don't want to say dumb down, but I tried to do like other girls did and drink. And that didn't work either. Number one, because I'm a lightweight. So like one drink and, but what happened then, I think, is I got really disconnected from myself because I wasn't being true to who I was. And so then I just felt incredibly lonely because I didn't feel connected to people at school, didn't feel connected to myself, didn't feel connected to family. And when I was 16, I had made a decision. I had an eating disorder also. I started that like around 16. I stopped eating to get the attention of my parents. And after a few months, I realized no one noticed I hadn't eaten anything. And then I'm like, uh-oh. So, you know, I asked my parents for help, and it was the 70s. And they're like, we don't do that. And, you know, just there was a lot of things that I could have been angry for. And I never understood why I wasn't. Like growing up, I kind of just knew it was their own hurt that was causing them to do that. And when I was 16, though, the feeling alone, just I knew I was either going to end my life or it needed to change. And so when I got my driver's license, I went, okay, I need to go get what I need from the world. And what I needed was to be seen and accepted for who I was and to feel unconditionally loved. So I go out and I'm like driving. I lived in the suburbs. I went into Center City, Philly, and I'm like, how am I going to do this? I don't know. So I started looking at people in the streets and going like, wow, what do they have in common with me? And by doing that for a few months, I actually felt less alone because I was like, you know, are they parents? Do they have kids? I wonder how they talk to their kids. And just started getting really curious about people. And after a few months of doing it, I wanted to know more. So I would just park my car and go walking down the streets and stop strangers and say, hey, my name's Leslie. I've kind of struggled with this. I wonder, what about you? And people would just pour their hearts out. And it was amazing. And the gift of my story, the gift of all that trauma is that I developed like, when I had conversations with strangers, they went so deep, so quick that it was like that true human connection with no agenda, but just to share the bond of who we are as human beings. And it filled my heart so much that I didn't, you know, after a while, like I didn't even need to be loved anymore, be loved, because I was being loved took the need away to be loved. And it was just so fulfilling. So I say, like, you know, the world was my home and strangers were my family. And I never understood any of that. I don't know. I just knew I always listened to my intuition. You know, whatever my heart told me to do, I would do. And if my head said, what are you, crazy? I'd be like, I would try to ignore my heart and I'd walk past a person and then I'd go, I got to go back. And I'd turn around and go back. So that way of living, though, following your intuition and being true to who you are, like standing in your truth and being vulnerable. I mean, I basically went out to the world and went, here I am, like me or not. And what it ended up I did was I ended up giving people what I needed and I got it back tenfold, you know? And so I needed to be seen, accepted, and unconditionally loved. I did that for other people, you know? And then it just, that way of living, life flowed, things just seemed very effortless. I would say, ooh, I think I want to do this. And before I knew it, it was done. And I'd be like, okay, how did that happen? And I'd be places where, for example, nursing school, people would be like, wow, how long in advance did you apply? And how long did you have to sleep out? And I'm like, what are you talking about? I filled out the application, took a test, and I was in, you know? So I never understood any of that. And when I left work in 2017, I knew that whatever this way of living was, which I call heart now, it showed me the best of myself and the best of people. And it showed me a world, what we're capable of, which we are nowhere near. Like we're so much, I don't know, it was just like this utopia, right? And it wasn't until about 2019 when I started writing myself that things started coming up, why I understood why I was that way. Well, I understand, like, I get all the turmoil, internal turmoil, and how you can lose your sense of self by growing up in trauma. Particularly, for me, I think the gaslighting and the mental manipulation and the emotional abuse did more damage than the sexual abuse. Because it rocks the core of your self-trust. Make sense?
That's true.
And I see now the key of why I was able to be that way in the world and never be afraid. I mean, I've traveled alone throughout the world and I've never been afraid ever, because my gut's going to tell me if I'm not safe. But that's because out in the world, I trusted myself because I was authentic. There was no armor. There was no guard. I was just me. And so I could listen to what my inner self or inner GPS, whatever you would call it, I could listen to that. And it steered me in much better places than my head did, than my ego, right? Mm-hmm. But every night when I'd go home, whether it was back to my parents or when I got married, I kind of put the protective armor on. And that's when I noticed, my life is so much different in my homes with the abusive people. And I didn't understand why. I was in my head when I was home with them. I wasn't out in the world. And so I finally realized it was the darn armor. And the way I realized that was when I started writing. I started this practice of writing from the adult self with your dominant hand. And then you let the left hand answer, or non-dominant hand answer. And for all my life, I've always woken up in the morning with kind of amnesia, and I wanted to know why. So I asked with the right hand, with my dominant hand, I wrote, like, why do we wake up that way? And the non-dominant hand started to write the word hate. And I'm like, who do we hate? And my dominant hand wrote Leslie, and I went, oh crap, I got work to do, and that's what led me to start writing to my younger self. And what I uncovered through that was the reason I hated myself was I didn't hate anyone else. I wasn't angry at anyone else. I was mad at me because in the presence of the people who I didn't feel safe around, I hid myself. I didn't show all of me because I was always called too big and I was too much and, all that stuff. And so then I went, wow, how many of us are walking around like really angry and frustrated, and we take it out on other people. In reality, we're angry with ourselves because we're not honoring ourselves and standing in our truth.
Sorry about the abuse you suffered as a kid.
Yeah.
No, I want to know, what was your cues for your turning point, and when did your turning point happen so that you would go to school to become an RN, change your life around, and see the difference in your choices? When did that happen?
You know what? I never understood this, but as a little kid, like around 2 or 3, I remember I used evidence-based practices that are evidence-based now, but back then no one ever used. And I didn't understand that. Like affirmations, I used to close my eyes and I remember doing this all the time. The world's a loving, accepting place. The world's a loving, accepting place. I used to say that over and over. And I also remember just saying to myself, I'm safe. I'm safe. I got you. I'm safe. So I use like NLP, and somehow that allowed me to shift the perception. So when anything would happen, or, when someone would be really mean, I would just sit there and go like, not about me. Wow. I wonder what they're hurting about. They must really need to be loved. And I just learned at an early age, and I never understood why. But in the past couple of years in writing, I uncovered a near-death experience I had when I was 2. I knew I was in a car accident, and I knew I had a head trauma. And but I wanted to know, well, it's really a complicated story. I had found out I had a lot of learning challenges that I never knew I had. And so, yeah, right. And so I asked my younger self, how did my brain get this way? Like, you're amazing, but how did it get this way? And she said something which kind of was cool and creeped me out at the same time, because I was not a religious person, or even spiritual before 2018. She's like, God gave it to us. And I was like, okay, why? And she said, to teach people to love and forgive. And so that was the beginning where things kind of like the pieces started coming together. So about a year ago, I took myself back to that ER experience. And I think this is the pivotal moment that changed everything. And it was nothing that I did, to be honest with you. It was just grace. But I remember seeing myself in the hospital and going, I don't know if I spoke at that age, but I was crying, going, don't send me home. Please don't send me home. Please don't send me home. And then all of a sudden, this incredible warmth came over me. Didn't see a white light or anything. It was just this warmth. And I heard this voice, but it didn't have a sound. And it said, you have to go home, and things are going to be really hard, but you'll be safe. And what I'm doing for you now, one day you'll do for others. And I went, oh my God, that's because people always said they felt safe in my presence. And I'm like, wow, this is so cool. There's so much. I've been trying to write a book, and there's just so much I don't even, because one thing kind of leads to the other. But I've always known since a kid that I always wanted to do the Peace Corps, because I always sensed whatever, like, we all have a mission and purpose. And, I always thought mine was just to do something to help humanity hurt less. And, so that's actually why I left nursing, is because a lot of weird synchronicities happened. And it was kind of like the universe, God was saying, yo, time to go, you're done. And I didn't want to go. So the signs got bigger and bigger until I was driving to work one day and just went, oh my God, I'm done. And so it's almost like if it was up to me, I would have stayed at my job. I loved it. It was so fulfilling. And I mean, it was up to me. I had free will, but you know what I mean? Like, something's guiding and pulling me. And when I came out of work, I was just like, I just have a message. Let me come speak. And then I ran into business, and they're like, you can't just speak. I'm like, why? Let me just speak. I live my life very honest and authentic, and I'm finding that not all people are comfortable with that. Trauma victims are. And for 30 years, I worked as a nurse with women who had trauma, who were on the system in Philly, and they did great. Like, a lot of them did really well. And when I asked them why, what it was I did, it really wasn't what I did. It was the willingness to sit in the vulnerability of my own being that allowed them to feel safe to experience theirs for the first time. And then once they were able to see themselves more accurately, they could shift their perceptions. So when asking a pivotal moment, it was that 2-year-old. And I think whatever it was, I was able to see myself for who I was, which is love, which is what we all are. I just didn't, something graced me not to allow the world to cover that up like it is with a lot of people, So I kind of walked through the world with the innocence of a child, seeing through the eyes of a child, but having an adult mind.
Leslie, can you tell us a little bit about that transition you had living live in Philadelphia. Can you let the folks know a little bit of
Yeah.
what you did? How did that happen? I think that's a very interesting story.
Yeah. Well, look, most of my life, people are like, wow, you do that? Like, how are you so courageous? And I didn't have an answer for it, right? But what I realize now is that those connections I had every day, when I felt one with myself and I felt one with the world, I knew I wasn't alone. I've never had emotional support. Like family has always been, they haven't been supportive, right? And so what I did with Philly, as I said, I've always listened to my intuition. And like last April, something inside of me was just, I kept hearing this say, go, go. And I'm like, where am I going? Like, what am I doing? And I just followed this sign and listened to my intuition. And I packed everything, sold everything, even sold my favorite convertible. And here's like how when you listen, when you're actually listening to yourself, I had this great convertible I loved, and I just gotten a brand new top on it. And I was debating, do I sell it? Do I have it shipped across wherever I'm going? And I went out one day, and the day I wasn't sure what to do, I went to put the brand new top down, and it got stuck. And it wouldn't work. So I look up, I'm like, all right, I get it. Sell the car, And so I sold my car, bought an SUV, hit the road, and just kind of like went on 95 going, which way? Where am I going? And I just let my intuition, I went north and south and ends up, I think my intuition had me leave because I was really sick and sitting at home because it was COVID, right? Sitting at home behind the computer, I never would have realized how sick I was. So it took me 3 months and 10,000 miles to get from Philadelphia to California. And so,
Wow.
yeah. And, it's just so my message, it's really hard. The reasons I say like who I really work with and enjoy working with are people. I always considered you're saying voices. I always felt like I was kind of the voice of the people, because I have been through stuff, but I was able to perceive it a different way. But our systems are just kind of, from being in the mental health, the Department of Health and Human Services, it's sometimes I think we hinder more than we help, particularly if it was the clientele I worked with, those who were in transition or lower socioeconomic, and like we just, I think our own stories, mental health, healthcare work, they get in the way because if we've got our armor on, if I'm a nurse and I'm taking care of someone and I've got my armor on to protect myself, like I'm not going to be empathetic. It's going to come out as sympathy, which is very judgy. And I'm not going to come off as authentic. And people who've had trauma are really good at sensing BS,
Right.
And all right, you say something. I've talked to your audience and get tired of hearing my voice.
So I really love your story. That's one of the reasons I asked you to come on. I think it's very impactful the way you move through your abusive stages and you realized the patterns over the years that you kept going through the same cycles over and over and over again, and your choice to actually leave and move out from that and ultimately break away from nursing, from your favorite convertible, from your profession, from your city, and move to somewhere else. That's really brave, and that says a lot about you. I do want you to tell the audience, what do you do right now? What are you into? What's your specialty?
Okay. So when I left nursing, again, I just wanted to be a speaker. And, we all have a sweet spot that comes easy. And one of the things that has always come easy for me is TV, radio. It's just unscripted. It's just somewhere that feels home, if that makes sense. Nursing did too. But I've been trying to merge the two sides of me. Like, I feel like I was born to be an Oprah and a Mother Teresa, and I'm trying to figure out how to merge the two and have them shake hands and do one. But what I do right now is I consult with systems on trauma-informed communication. And so trauma we'll have to do another show, or maybe on the Adverse Childhood Experience Study. It's a study that was done like 20 years ago by CDC, and it gave scientific evidence to the physical, emotional, mental, spiritual damage that feeling unsafe chronically as a child does to us. And so like when I'm 60, when I grew up, people are like, whatever it is, just suck it up. And it stays with you forever. Like, even though I emotionally healed very young, it still got stuck in my body. I have major autoimmunes, organic brain trauma. Like, I wasn't able to get it out of my body. And that takes a really long time. But what I do now is, so the trauma informed is the systems came up with a new trauma informed. To me, in my interpretation, my trainings, it's being a good human being, really. Is what it's like. It's instead of getting mad if someone cuts you off in traffic, to go, wow, what was their day? It was kind of like what I did when I was younger, right? It's just looking, instead of taking everything personally, it's looking, and the systems use what happened to you. I don't like that, because that still makes, if I say to you, what happened to you? If you've been in trauma, you're going to go, what's the matter with me? Right? So I like to just say, what do you experience? Self-literacy, self stands for safe to express love and forgiveness. And literacy is just, as working with individuals, I help them see themselves. I actually don't help. I hold them, and together we find who they really are before the world piled stuff on top of them. I used to work labor and delivery. I worked at a high-risk OB as a nurse. And, I remember, like, every time baby came out, I'd be like, wow, who were you put here to be? Before the world gets to you, who what's your truth? And it's, I say I'm a teacher, but really I help people unlearn what society has done to us, and all this stuff that isn't necessarily the truth that they put on us. So, I work with people, I do conversations. They're usually a couple-hour conversation. There's no charge for that, because the foundation is unconditional love. So if I charge, then there's condition. But after that, I do 4 sessions of getting in touch with their inner child and learning what questions to ask and how to truly be your best friend. Like, even I live this way, it doesn't mean I don't get in my head. I do. I was telling you right before this, I was in my head, and I've just learned ways to go, like, when I start the negative self-talk, I go, you know what? No, stop this, because I love you way too much to do this. Knock it off. Like, let's look at so it's not like I don't experience those things every day. I do. It's just, I've learned how to change the perception. The beliefs, I think changing beliefs is too hard. Like, and it doesn't always work. Like, you got to change the perception of the experience. And when you change the perception of the experience, then the belief will change on its own.
And I do like your acronym SELF. What is it? Self-expression of love and
safe to, oh, look, I got tons, because everything I do is an acronym. Because when I went out to healthcare, I would end up like doing all the talking. And I was used to, one of the other things I did when I was younger too, I went out, it was like, I always focused on understanding before being understood. So when I came out and I had to do all this talking, I'm like, this doesn't feel right. I need to listen, because I learned through, I don't know if you've noticed this, but since COVID, man, people really don't listen. I actually said something to a guy once on sales. He was, customer service. I said, are you finding people don't listen anymore? And there was silence, and I went, hello? He goes, I'm sorry, what'd you say? I was like, okay, point taken. But what we don't realize is, if you take the time to listen, to ask questions, and to listen what someone says, that is the best way to develop self-awareness. Because I tried to see a piece of me in everyone I'd see. So everyone I come in contact with, stranger, friend, it doesn't matter who, I'd go, what, I don't even have to consciously do it. I was talking to someone the other night for like 3 hours, this girl I'd never known. And like, her story, I'm going, I think I still do that. I need to like reframe that, so you can, science has shown that we are all one. I mean, the law, universal law of connectivity, and we can see ourselves in other people if we get the damn, blinders off and the armor, get rid of the armor. The reason I go to systems is because it's really scary to ask someone to take their armor off. So I figure if we all do it together, leaders, those who serve and those who are served, if we all take the same curriculum and we do it together, I'm telling you, that feeling of oneness, not only with yourself, but with the world. I literally have walked through my life pretty much emotionally alone. I found out now that autism, Savant syndrome, like all of these learning disorders, like there are 3 areas of cognition, I'm less than 1%. Like I went through college twice and finished off my class. I'm looking back going, holy, I don't think I read a book. That takes a lot of strength and courage. And it wasn't from family members. It was from you and all the people on the street that allowed me to feel one with the world, which gave me the courage and strength and emotional support when I didn't really have any in my life. So everything I am, I owe to my parents from my story, wouldn't change a thing, but I also owe to every stranger I've hugged and talked to and heard their stories and shared with. They made me who I am today. And, I think that all happened because there's a message that I'm supposed to, because people, the way I live my life is very different. And, also, though, I didn't understand. I remember now going back, I remember in school going, I don't understand what you guys are talking about. Like, I was bright, so I was able to pull it off. But I didn't know how. I knew the answers, but I had no clue how people got from A to B. I just kind of wandered till I hit B. But that was actually the lesson, because that's a cool way of living. Like I look in my life more at the experience than I do the outcome, because the fun's in getting there and the stuff you learn. So I help trauma survivors on seeing themselves for the first time. And as I said, like, people have always said to me, like, wow, you're such a gift. And the gift really, I think, is authenticity, because when you're authentic and your heart is open, people can see themselves. It's almost like a mirror. You know what I mean? Like, it's not, for a while before I learned that, I thought, wow, if people identify with me so much, do I have all these issues? But then I realized, no, it's just when your heart's open, their own self reflects back out at them. And so I help people find themselves. And it doesn't take very long when you listen and ask questions, few sessions, and because it's work we have to do ourselves. And it's daily. I'll always be doing this, finding out more about myself.
And I do feel that your work, we had a conversation before, your work is very impactful. We had a nice conversation about our past and growing up. And I felt that was very eye-opening for myself, also looking back and paying attention to certain things I never paid attention to. So thank you for that. That was really helpful.
Well, that's why, the transformational conversation, because I ask questions that most people don't. And to me, I know I've had a great conversation. Like when someone says, wow, I never thought of that before. And I'm like, yes, I plant seeds is what I do to people. I plant the seed of a new way of being. And I talk about healing us through learning to live with love of self, but live and love are actually, they're acronyms too. It's like live is looking to inspire, validate, and empower. And love, no, it wasn't E, I've gone backwards, but love is listening with objectivity and vulnerability to empower. So they're things that like we did as kids, and for some reason we didn't feel safe. Didn't have to be trauma. It could have been your parents told you what you wanted to do when you were grew up was silly, and we went, maybe I better not show people myself, and that's where it started. And I think times are coming ahead, like in the next 10 years, I think we're going to be different. And I think where they turn to feel safe now, I'm not sure it's going to be there. So I actually think my role in all this is to help people learn to feel safe with themselves so they can feel safe in whatever kind of world we have.
So the show being Voices, right?
Mm-hmm.
If 50 years from now, someone was listening to this, there was no visual. So what words would you want them to hear you say that would impact them or would change their life 50 years from now?
Yeah, I go with these 3 words. Like, ask yourself the question, do you see me? But ask that question while you're looking in the mirror, and really look and say, am I seeing myself? Is this really who I am? It's just to know, people always said, the Reverend came from, people always said, like, wow, you sound like the Bible. I'm like, I've never read the Bible, never went to church. But knowing ourselves is truly the only way, and not judging what we find out, right? It is what it is until it isn't. And yeah, just love yourself, because when you're free to love yourself, that is the true freedom we're searching for. But when you love yourself, it's so easy to love other people. It's so easy. Like, you don't take things personally. I found in my life, the only time toxic people are toxic is when I'm not good with me. If I'm good with me, nobody's toxic. I can hold anyone in like anything, because I know who I am. And I think the meaning of life, all our purpose, everyone strives to find their purpose, but I think the purpose of life is self-expression and self-expansion. So I went through life asleep to the fact that I think I was actually spiritually awoke, but I was asleep to the fact that I was spiritually awoke, and big as a result of that near-death experience. And now I'm just awake, and I want to wake people up and go, look at yourself. You are so much better than you think you are, and life can be so much more amazing. Look in your eyes and there's a connection, and so know yourself. Know yourself.
What would you say to persons who wanted to contact you?
For me, the best way is actually, if they're comfortable shooting me a text. One of the challenges I found recently is reading on the computer. I have a really hard time doing that. And so texting, I've seen that works fine. But if not, they can reach out to email. And, what I like to say to people is just schedule time, like you and I, right? We just had a conversation. We didn't know each other. It's not going to cost you anything. I'll give you as much time as you need. As I said, I was on the phone with 3 hours with someone the other day, because it's that important that people see themselves. Sometimes for the first time in these conversations, they had no clue who they were. And, after that, if you found that conversation was valuable, then we can do some inner child work. I'm not one of those coaches going to keep you on forever. I can guide you, but each one of us, we've got to, it's within. I can guide you and suggest like things that work for me and things that didn't work for me. I can ask you the right questions, but at the end of the day, like, I teach people how to do Reiki. I teach them the different methods of breathing, because you can't hire someone to do that with you every day. Most people don't have enough money for that, and so anyhow, so that text me preferably. If not, just email me and I'll get back to you.
And thank you, Reverend Leslie Peters, RN. Thank you so much for coming on our on this show. I really appreciate it.
Yeah.
And we'll talk. We'll keep talking and we'll keep communicating. And I definitely want to collaborate with you on some other things.
Can I tell you real quick? I forgot to tell you. Heart. right? Like the
Yeah.
acronym, another acronym, right? The way that came about was because a business coach said, I mean, teach people what you do. And I'm like, what the heck? Okay, tell me what I do and I'll do it. He said, what makes you walk towards people the rest of the world walks away from? So I thought about it for a while. And I thought, what characteristics does it take? And that's why I came up with HEART. It's honesty, empathy, acceptance, respect, and trust. And initially, when I left work in 2017 and came up with this, I thought that meant you had to give that to other people. But then a short time after is when I realized we have to have heart with ourselves first. And when we have heart with ourselves, it just spills out. You don't have to try to be kind. You don't have to try to be compassionate. As if you're that way with yourself, it just becomes part of who we are. That's who we are. So that's it. I'm done.
True.
Thank you.
So true. So true. I'm just listening. I'm just picking up the gems. Thank you so
Yeah.
much. Thank you so
Thank
much, guys,
you.
for watching. Thank you, Leslie. I really appreciate you. We scheduled this and we
Yeah.
finally got it done. And I really appreciate your support. Thank you so
Oh,
much.
not a
And
problem.
stay on. We're going into our exit wind down. So thank you so much, guys, for watching.